Hello! Welcome to class number 4 of AP World History. My name is Jason Epand. Today, and not today, but this class, we're going to be talking about religions in the Vedic age, and then we're moving on. I'm going to try to complete all of Chapter 5, and Chapter 5 is Ancient China. So I'm going to try to take care and do all of that within the next 30 minutes. So let's get right to it. I would mention we're going to start with religions in the Vedic age, all right? Maybe you could see where we're heading with this, but first let me give you a reminder about Aryan religion, okay? Aryan, polytheistic, many different gods. Indra, I-N-D-R-A, the war god. Another god that they had is Varuna, V-A-R-U-N-A, who dealt with, I guess you could say, the ethical concern and the cosmic order, making sure everything is kosher. It's cool. And they had gods of the sun, they had gods of the sky, they had many different gods, okay? The Aryan religion was very, very concerned with ritual sacrifices, all right? Lots of ritual sacrifices to the various gods and priests. There were a great deal of elaborate rituals, and sometimes they would, even ingest the most absurd things in order to reach the state that the holy state, in order to communicate with the deity. One of these is called soma, S-O-M-A. Soma is a hallucinogenic drink that when you imbibe in it, it can provide you with visions. God, I've never taken it, so I don't know what visions they are, but visions, I guess. And they had a great deal of chants and again, sacrifices, etc., etc. However, sometime around 800 BCE, spirituality goes under some sort of strange transformation as these priests, they begin to retreat to the forests and they begin to think a great deal more about, I guess the human condition or whatever it is, all right? And they become hermits, all right? And they begin to come up with certain notions that become popular once again. They were popular in Dravidian time, but not in Aryan time. But the Aryans start reintroducing these ideas back into, you would say, society. Remember, society is a mixture of Aryan and Dravidian. Ideas like transmigration or ideas like reincarnation, okay? And what you have then is, during this period, is a blending between Aryan desires and Aryan ideas and sort of the old Dravidian cultural habits, all right? At least that we attribute to the Dravidian cultural habits, all right? And what we've got here is the creation of something called the Upanishads, capital U-P-A-N-I-S-H-A-D-S. And the Upanishads are works of religious teachings. They are works of religious teachings, and they take the form of a dialogue between a wise man, a sage, and his disciples. So you could say the Upanishads then would be very similar to the Socratic method, even though Socrates never wrote anything, but very similar parallel ideas right there, okay? Some of the ideas that stem from the Upanishads include the creation of not the creation, but including the idea of the Brahman. B-R-A-H-M-A-N. Don't get it confused with the Brahmin. This is the Brahman. The Brahman is the universal soul that me, the cameraman, and everyone here is a part of. We're all part of the universal soul. Even you who's listening right now, you're a part of it. You and we share that together. Isn't that's beautiful and communal? A little creepy, but anyways. That's the Brahman, all right? Now, the highest goal for us as individuals, according to these ideas in the Upanishads, is to escape reincarnation. We don't want to be reincarnated back into a human body. No, what we want to do is we want to join the Brahman. We want to join the universal soul. Okay, that's our goal. All right? And there are certain terms that are used to describe the entire process. For instance, a samsara, capital S-A-M-S-A-R-A. Samsara refers to an individual who has been born many times, or a soul who has experienced reincarnation many times. A word I'm sure you heard of is karma. Karma, like John Lennon, instant karma is going to get you, right? Karma. Karma refers to specific incantations that a soul experiences, right? And it refers to the fact, I'm sure you know karma. You do something good right now. The hope is that in the future that goodness will be repaid back to you. And that's what it sort of means. Finally, there's moksha. Moksha, which sounds like a word that the Ewoks would create. Moksha. M-O-K-S-H-A. What moksha is that final glorious moment when we, for all time, are permanently liberated from the human flesh and we join the Brahman. And these are terms, all right? And basically, all of these ideas begin to greatly influence society, okay? And these ideas of the Upanishads only assist at more firmly entrenching the caste system in South Asia, okay? The idea of samsara, the idea of karma especially, reinforces the idea of caste and social hierarchy and harmony, okay? The Upanishads were also intellectual companions, but they're also teaching you to obey certain high ethical standards. The idea of disliking envy. They're very against, you should not be envious. You should not be greedy. You should be very comfortable with whoever or whatever you are within this life, with the idea that if you commit good actions, your karma will be benefited, and next life you're going to move up the caste scale. All right. They also have a great respect for all living things. They try to promote a vegetarian diet, and one of the other things the Upanishads is the worship of cattle, of cows. Okay, people in this area do not eat beef, and all of these things I've talked about all can be carried under the umbrella today known as the major religion of Hinduism. That's right. All the stuff we talked about, the caste system is now, even though the caste system was created separate to that of Hinduism, today Hinduism represents both the caste system and all of these notions of the Upanishads and these terms that I just went over. Okay? And that takes us to the end of chapter 4. So let's move on now. And we're now going to move on to East Asia. East Asia. When we think of East Asia, we have to start with the Middle Kingdom. The Middle Kingdom, China. China, the one, as they like to refer to themselves. The Middle Kingdom of China. China, where does its community start? Well, it starts all around the Yellow River. The Yellow River. Basically, there's a water source in a high plateau in Tibet, and loess soil, which is soil you sort of, with a great deal of, fertile elements, all right, it's carried by the river's water. Unfortunately, what this loess does is that it ends up coloring the water, making the water look kind of yellow. So that's why we call it today the Yellow River, because of this loess, these materials that infiltrate the clear water. Unfortunately, as I mentioned in a previous class, you've got the Nile on top, you've got the Indus, and then at the bottom, you've got the Yellow River. The Yellow River is known as China's sorrow. Why? Because there is so much flooding, and it's unpredictable, and it's extensive, and it required a real great mind in order to control this raging river, okay? One positive thing, though, is that the soil is very easy to work with. The soil, the loess, is very soft, and it creates very fertile ground. The problem is a great deal of flooding. Flooding destroys crops. Talk about the history of Neolithic societies in China. After 5000 BCE, one Neolithic societies do begin to be formed. Yangshao, Y-A-N-G-S-H-A-O, is developed after 5000 BCE, and there is a village, Banpo village, which is known for its pottery and its bone tools. I know some Korean students who would be listening think Banpo is a Korean thing. Well, Po, the Chinese, I think Po in Chinese means pier or dock. I forget what Ban means. Oh well, but I think there's a Banpo location in Seoul, if I'm not mistaken. Anyways, and that's what's going on as far as Neolithic societies. But the first major, you could say, larger society may have been, and reports are coming in over the past 20-25 years that this myth was a reality. And that's the myth or the truth of the Xia Dynasty, the Xia Dynasty. You have to forgive me. In English, it's spelled X-I-A. In Mandarin or Cantonese, I don't know how it's pronounced. My pronunciation is poor. Forgive me. Anyways, the archaeology of Xia is in its earliest stages right now. Okay, what people have figured out is that it was established somewhere around 2200 BCE, and its founder is King Yu, Y-U. Okay, he is the dynasty founder, and he is the hero of flood control. That's what he's known for. All right, not that he was a great military leader. No. He was a hero of flood control. And potentially the capital city of the Xia dynasty is Erlitou, capital E-R-L-I-T-O-U, possible the capital city. All right, anyways, so that's the Xia dynasty, which we think now was a reality. The first, for sure, dynasty that lasted a long time was the Shang Dynasty, which is in between 1766 and 1122 BCE, okay? The Shang arose in the southeastern part of China. And there's lots of written records and material remaining from the Shang. What the Shang stand for are the following. Number one, these are characteristics of the Shang that may appear on a test. Number one, pounded earth technology. It's the Shang that comes up with a certain type of building technology, pounded earth, that is going to allow for the creation of obviously the Great Wall of China. The Shang begin it. They don't do a great deal of it. All right, they're not the number one group that's known for the Great Wall of China, but they do lay its foundation. Okay. Next thing, the Shang are known for their monopoly of bronze. Bronze metallurgy, and I should say not the Shang is known for it, but rather the aristocracy and the nobility of the Shang have a monopoly over bronze, okay? And this type of having, the nobility having a monopoly over the variety of goods, maybe bronze, maybe iron, maybe salt, is a common feature within ancient Chinese society, okay? Obviously, once you have control of the Yellow River, because the loess soil is good to work with, you have plenty of food. With the idea of plenty of food, that means you're going to have surpluses, and thus these surpluses are used to service the Shang's big army, okay? And the Shang-Zhou developed quite a big army, and they begin to, you could say travel around and begin to explore other areas. Areas like Vietnam, areas like Korea. They're known for going there in these oar-propelled boats, O-A-R propelled boats, okay? That's what they're known for. The Shang, as far as their capital, they move around 6 times. They move around a bit. They're kings when they die. They have very lavish tombs with thousands of objects, etc., etc. And the Shang, even though they do control a great deal of area in China, there are other states. It's not like the Shang are the only state in China during this time. There's a state called the Shang-Dynasty. Again, my pronunciation is awful. Capital S-A-N-X-I-N-G-D-U-I. And they are another state located in China during the time of the Shang. The Shang eventually get eclipsed by another group of people, and this is the famous Zhou Dynasty. The Zhou Dynasty is around for even a longer period of time, but they're really only, really in control for the first few hundred years of their reign. But their full dynasty is from 1122 to 256 BCE, okay? The number one thing when it comes to the Zhou Dynasty, and something you'll be tested on again and again, is the idea of mandate of heaven. Mandate of heaven is the idea of the king having the right to rule. And it's the idea of mandate of heaven. It's from God up there, right? God is offering his permission to the individual to rule. Now, here's the idea. The idea of divine rule. I mentioned this in the previous class, and I'm going to elaborate on it right now. There's a big difference between the Chinese version of mandate of heaven and the European version of divine right of rule. The Chinese version says that if the times are really bad and people are suffering, this must mean that God has, or the spirit above, whatever, I don't want to call it God, because ancient China did not have a religious tradition, but I'll get to that in a moment. It's the idea that the king, whoever's king at the time, no longer has the mandate of heaven because times are bad. So that's the reason why that we're going to revoke the mandate of heaven from you. That's in China. So Chinese king can be removed and the mandate of heaven can be taken away. Not in Europe. In Europe, the divine king is king for life, period. Never going to be taken away. Okay? So thus, the Zhou king, though, while he had the mandate of heaven, he was the son of heaven. Okay? And again, it's only given to virtuous rulers. The difference between the government of the Shang and the government of the Zhou is that the Shang government is much more centralized, whereas the Zhou is known for their decentralized administration. At first, this works out well as they use obedient princes and relatives to rule other regions. The problem is, as we know, as time goes on, the central government begins to lose power and a bunch of, you would say, power-hungry individuals in a variety of regions want to take over and expand their empire, which is going to cause a bit of, friction. It's going to cause friction. It's friction. It's going to fractionalize the area right there. That's not good. That's not good. Okay? And that's a consequence of decentralized. The iron is spreading throughout China, all throughout during the Zhou Empire. As we mentioned before, iron becomes big somewhere around the turn of the millennium, around 1000, most places around the world. Okay? As goes on, because of the fact that it's decentralized and because everybody's not on the same page, this is going to provide for nomads to come in and to cause ruin bit by bit to the Zhou. There's one nomadic invasion in 711 BCE where the Zhou capital is sacked. And then, basically princes are becoming more and more independent so that by the time of 403, a period from 403 to 221 BCE, this is known as the period of the Warring States. So that even though the Zhou dynasty is technically still, alive, basically you have a variety of states within China that are fighting against each other for supremacy during this time. And the last Zhou king abdicates in 256 BCE. Let's move on now to society and family in ancient China, okay? I already talked about here the fact that the nobility, they very much rule, and the aristocracy is living a very lavish lifestyle, and there are certain manuals of etiquette in which they need to follow, all right? Most people, however, are peasants, by far, are peasants, okay? And these peasants, typically, they're not owning the land. The land is owned by the aristocracy, and this is going to cause a great deal of problem when we talk about the Han Dynasty later on in Chinese history. okay? But the peasants, they typically live in small subterranean housing. They live in housing which is underground, okay? And they're, involved with taking care of the land. One very interesting aspect about this is what women are doing at this time. Women, yes, they're weaving and they're winemaking, but let's take a look at that weaving for a second. It's during this time, in this era, back in the pre-classical times, when sericulture is invented. And sericulture, S-E-R-I-C-U-L-T-U-R-E, is the idea of silk, right? And women during this time are very involved in raising silkworms, etc., etc. A message to all the Koreans listening to this, I hope you know what bundegi is, because bundegi is the cocoon of the silkworm before it turns into a moth. Yummy? Maybe? I don't know. Anyways, all right, and of course Chinese society also has slaves and prisoners as well. Okay? Moving on. Let's talk about the family and patriarchy. Ancient Chinese society is very much into, and even today, I shouldn't say ancient, worshiping their ancestors. Ancestors are venerated, all right? Because the idea is that your ancestors are consistently around you. Their spirits are still here. Thus, we believe in their presence and their continuing influence. And thus, just like, oh my God, I'm forgetting the term of the Chuseok, when a lot of Koreans go back and they go to their, ancestors' graves and they do a variety of rituals, and et cetera, et cetera. This all comes from ancient Chinese society and stuff like this. Okay? It must be said, though, that the notion of a patriarchal society actually evolved during the Zhou dynasty. You see, during the Shang Dynasty, it was matrilineal. Matrilineal, M-A-T-R-I-L-I-N-E-A-L. Matrilineal means is that the rule of descent, basically we get descent from the mother's side of the family. Okay, an example of that is that, if you marry a woman, you go and live with her family. But what happened is that in the Zhou dynasty, because of the fact that it was much more decentralized, this places a greater emphasis on the idea of individual achievement, even at the top level, and then begins to bleed down, meaning that the individual princes, because they're allowed to rule over a certain amount of land, their achievements become much more integral, that they can maintain the land, maybe expand it a little bit, etc., etc. And thus, it's the idea, because men were always considered to be the aggressive ones in going out and attacking and getting more land or getting more food, the matrilineal society, which was firmly entrenched during the Shang Dynasty, transitions to a patrilineal society, okay? So just recognize that type of idea, all right? It's the idea that the rise of large states brings a great deal of focus on man's contributions. Let's talk about writing in Chinese cultural development. First of all, China, ancient China, is secular. There is no evidence of organized religion. Okay, maybe they had like some respect for a greater impersonal heavenly power or whatever it is, but there's no organized religion in ancient China. None. None. We're going to get into Confucianism and that stuff, but these are schools of political and social thought. They're not organized religions. Please keep that in mind. Confucianism, Taoism in its essence, legalism, these are not religions. These are not organized religions. Ancient China has no organized religions. It is secular. They also, however, they do have their own ways of communicating with the spirits, and one of those ways is through oracle bones or dragon bones. This is kind of funky, you take a rock, you write a question inside of the rock, then you put the rock under fire, and then cracks form on the rock, and you read the cracks and you get your answer. I don't know, whatever works for you, whatever gets you through the night, it's all right, right? Okay, but these are the oracle and dragon bones, and a lot of these were found by archaeologists in the 1890s, et cetera, okay? Then, as far as Chinese writing goes, in the beginning, Chinese writing was pictographic, meaning that if they wanted to say turtle, they would literally draw a turtle. But bit by bit, as the generations go on, the writing changes, so that by the end of the Shang Dynasty, a great deal of the characters that some people would recognize today in Mandarin or in Cantonese and Chinese, I wouldn't because I don't speak Chinese, they could basically, the origins of modern Chinese writing was found in the Shang Dynasty. That the character change from pictograph to ideograph, it caused basically, this change has still been maintained and respected by the Chinese and their language today, okay? Again, pictograph and ideograph. Ideograph is I-D-E-O-G-R-A-P-H. Ideograph refers to characters, characters, you know, if it's letters or whether it's the variety of characters that are in Mandarin, Cantonese, Hunan, etc., the Chinese languages of today. The Chinese languages of today, okay? Again, modern Chinese writing is a direct descendant of the Shang Dynasty, In terms of writing and the Zhou Dynasty is known for their books, their literature. I'll give you some examples of their books. First, you have the Book of Change, which is basically a manual of diviners, people who are trying to communicate with the spiritual world. The Book of History, which obviously is about the history of the Zhou people. The Book of Rites, which deals with a great deal of ritual, the rules of etiquette and the rules for family and aristocrats. And then you've got the most famous one, which is the Book of Songs. The Book of Songs is the most famous one. It's the most poetic, and it's basically a group of verses together. And it's the most famous book from the Zhou Dynasty that exists today. Unfortunately, most Zhou writings have perished, but these four do remain, especially the Book of Songs. All right, so ancient China and the larger world, okay? First of all, let's talk about the variety of groups that exist on the periphery of Chinese society. First, let's go back over to those steppes, those grass and marshlands, those shrublands in Central Asia. A bunch of nomadic people live there, and they're consistently integrating and socializing and involved with the greater Chinese society. Okay, there's a lot of exchange of products between these nomads and Chinese farmers. These nomadic people, though, do not have a great deal of agriculture. They depend on the Chinese for agriculture and for rice, etc., okay? But these nomadic people, typically, they're herders. They have animals, so there's a great deal of trade for, you'd say, meat and rice. Unfortunately for the Chinese, from time to time, these nomads did come in and they would raid Chinese agricultural societies. These nomadic people are not, they're not synthesizing. Now let me explain what that means. The nomadic people are not adopting Chinese ways. They're outside of the greater and larger Chinese community. Something which China is very, very good at throughout the centuries is taking a sort of an outside ethnic group that bears a similar resemblance, whether it's physical or spiritual or mental or emotional, to the Chinese, and over the centuries, fully assimilating them into Chinese society. This process is called syncization. Syncization. It's a tough syncization. S-I-N-C-I-Z-I-A-T-I-O-N. Syncization. Okay? And that's the process that the Chinese, they basically take an outside ethnic group and they are fully assimilating them into Chinese ways. The ways of the Chinese people and the language and the culture, etc., Okay? However, these nomads that lived in Western China, remember China is so huge, but lived in the West, okay, in Central Asia, they did not adopt Chinese ways, but they very much relied on the grains and other manufactured goods of the Chinese. Then in the south, we've got an expansion of Chinese society that exists outside of the Zhou Dynasty or the Shang Dynasty, okay? These people live in what is known as the Yangtze Valley. Y-A-N-G-Z-I Valley. The Yangtze Valley obviously refers to the Yangtze River, which is the second major river in China. It's not as long and spectacular as the Yellow, but it is far more dependable. And with it, the people in southern China and anyone who could access the river will have a dependable source of 2 crops of rice per year, which is great for those people. Okay, the indigenous people of southern China. Perhaps you saw a film by Clint Eastwood by the name of Gran Torino. These are the Hmong people. And Hmong people originally were from southern China before they moved out to Laos and a variety of other areas, okay? Many are assimilated into Chinese society and become full-on scale, Chinese, maybe even later Han Chinese, okay? And however, some leave, some go to Thailand and the areas I just talked about in the hills, etc., all right? The Hmong people, H-M-O-N-G. Finally, in the south, there is another very famous state that competes with the Zhou for supremacy, and that's the state of Chu, C-H-U. C-H-U. They're in sort of the central region of the Yanxi area, okay? They're challenging the Zhou for supremacy. They never succeed at that, okay? But they do end up fully assimilating into, you would say, majority Han Chinese ways. They do synthesize, okay? They adopt Chinese political and social traditions and writing. And lo and behold, that takes us to the end of Chapter 5 here and this particular section. Chapter 6 is about the early societies of Meso America. What is Meso America, you say? Meso America is Middle America. So we're basically talking about the land which is now Mexico and Latin America. And that's what we're going to be talking about in Chapter 6. It's early societies of Meso America and also Oceania, but that's not going to be till next class. But for right now, let's just think of Meso America, all right? When we're talking about Meso America, obviously we need to talk about when people, human beings, Homo sapiens, made the trip from northeastern Siberia to, you would say, Alaska and northern Canada. Why do I say that? Because people, Homo sapiens, are not indigenous to North and South America. They're not. People are not there. So in order for people to get to North and South America, what do they have to do? Somebody had to go there. Someone had to walk there, use a boat, okay? And people finally did do that, all right? People around 13,000 BCE traveled from Siberia to Alaska via crossing the Bering Strait, capital B-E-R-I-N-G Strait, all right? By 9,500 BCE, humans reached the southernmost point of South America, okay? And over time, as animals begin, there aren't as many animals in this area because it's, I guess there wasn't enough life to sustain or whatever. As hunting becomes more difficult, all right, that's when agriculture begins. And it begins somewhere around 7,500 BCE, which is actually kind of early considering the rest of the world, okay? What are some of the major crops that people grow in Meso America compared to the rest of the world? Something for you to know: beans, squash, chilies. These are all very important ingredients in North and South America. Beans especially, we'll talk about the influence of beans on the Columbian exchange later on. However, beans are important. Why are beans important? Because beans provide the ground, the variety, I think it's nitrogen or a certain amount of carbon dioxide, which replenishes the ground and allows for further growth. But when we think of Mesoamerican agriculture, the number one crop you must think of course, is maize. M-A-I-Z-E, maize. And maize is the staple crop of Mesoamerica during this time. Agricultural villages begin to really pop up around 3000 BCE. But before we end this class, I want to give you two very important facts about North and South America, okay? Number one, there is no domesticated animals in North and South America. Outside of people who live in South America and use the alpaca, which is like a sort of a llama, A-L-A-P-A-C-A, there are no horses, there's no domestication of animals, period. All right, you have to know that for the test. North and South America, no domestication of animals. And because there's no domestication of animals, there is also no wheeled vehicles. No wheeled vehicles in North and South America as well, because there's no animals to pull the cart, right? To make the cart move with the little wheels going round and round. Not in North and South America. No, nothing there. Okay? So that brings us basically to the end of this class. Next class, we're going to obviously finish this chapter, chapter 6 of Mesoamerica, and then head into chapter 7 also of Persia, because chapter 7 is the beginning of the classical era. All right? Chapter 7, Persia. All right? And it's the idea of we're moving now from the era of 500 BCE to 500 CE, the classical era. But before we go, I want to ask you a couple of questions for homework, and I want you to think about it, and then you can listen to my answer in the next class, okay? Number one, I want you to compare the status of women in Mesopotamia and in Egypt, etc., etc. You could maybe think about what women's status is in Mesopotamia, Egypt, South India, and South Asia, and ancient China. That's number one, okay? Think about the ways that women can exert their influence. All right, stuff like that. The next question I want to ask you was, I want to know, why was ancient Egypt more politically stable than Mesopotamia? Why was ancient Egypt more politically stable than Mesopotamia? Okay, and obviously you should know. I'm not going to ask that. I think those two questions are good enough for right now. Okay. Anyways, thank you very much for listening. And next class again, we're going to do Mesopotamia and we're going to do Persia. Okay. Thank you. And Oceania. Oceania is also part of Chapter 6. So Mesopotamia, Oceania, Chapter 6, and Persia, Chapter 7. Thank you so much for listening. I will answer these questions for you next class. Take care. Bye-bye.